second panel about micro-histories of exclusion. We have two papers, two colleagues. First of them is Teresa Juhasová. She is a PhD student at our university, Charles University, at my institute, so welcome on the board. And her research focuses on post-conflict societies, identity and oral history in Slovakia and Hungary. She received scholarships at the Leibniz Institute for East and Southeast European Studies in Regensburg and the Corvinus University of Budapest. She is now in the first year of her PhD study, and she's writing a PhD thesis about ethnic cohabitation in a Slovak small town from 1945 to the present, and she's going to present, I think, first results of her researches in this topic. So,
thank you very much for introducing me. I'm very delighted to be here. And as we already said, in this presentation I'm going to present the very first results of my research based mainly on biographic interviews with the local inhabitants of the city or town in focus. And later I will focus more in my research on the archival materials from the local archives. I would like to start my presentation with a quotation. I quote, "My father started shaving and then they came with a machine gun. They wanted to take members of my family to lager. It was Schmotze, the communist, partisan, and one or two more. Here in Medzev, in the lager, they gave such a round end. My mother had two, one on her back. She was a big German." This excerpt from a biographic interview throws us directly to the reality of post-war Medzev, which is a town located in today's eastern Slovakia, southern Spiš, which is a linguistically mixed area until today. At first sight, we can see slight discrepancies. The narrator talks about the German partisan perpetrator, Schmotze, based on the name, who was in charge of executing orders of the new post-war authorities against the German population. And in my presentation, I want to focus precisely on these discrepancies. On a micro-study, I aim to show how did the post-war reality look like in a small Slovak town, inhabited mainly by German-speaking inhabitants. I have two core questions. Why did some German speakers remain and become important figures in local administration, while some were expelled, dragged off to labor camps, or deprived of property? What were the reasons for exclusion in a close and intimate society? In the presentation, I will argue that in a linguistically mixed area, the national categories, such in my case German or Slovak, were in many cases not the basis for the post-war persecution. That the decision-making was often situational and based on other criteria than the presupposed fixed national identity. Let me introduce the local context a bit. The examined town of Medzev was founded in the 13th century by German-speaking incomers, and the German language, or its local dialect, prevailed there until the middle of the 20th century. According to the census from 1930, Medzev had 2,666 inhabitants, out of which more than 2,000 registered themselves as Germans. However, members of local community, of local German-speaking community, do not usually perceive themselves as Germans, but rather as so-called Mantags. The main component of this Mantag identity is the specific local dialect of German, so-called Mantag or Mantagisch, even though for the members of the community is also the idea of common origin and history very important. And this distinction between the categories German and Mantag is crucial for the self-identification of the local people. Because of the specific Mantag identity, and also thanks to remote position of the town, the local inhabitants during centuries developed independent postures with regard to macro politics and generally main political events happening on a state level. In the modern period, this manifested itself mainly in the 1848 revolution during the establishment of Czechoslovakia in 1918, and mainly, what is most important for my topic, also before entering the World War II. The majority of Mantags did not support the main political party of Slovak Germans, the so-called Karpaten Deutsche Partei, after 1938 Deutsche Partei, which later became strongly nationalistic, but rather voted for the pro-Hungarian CIPSA Deutsche Partei, and what is more striking, also the Communist Party of Czechoslovakia. Because of the growing support of the Communist Party and the significant number of workers in Medzev, the town was also known as the Red Nest. In March 1939, Mantags was also very reserved about the declaration of the Slovak state, which was subordinated to the Nazi Germany. The Slovak Germans were citizens of the Slovak state and therefore were not enlisted in Wehrmacht, the Nazi German army, as for example were the Germans in Bohemia and Moravia. However, since the summer of 1941, the Slovak Germans were under pressure to enter German SS combat units, and the agitation escalated at the beginning of 1943 after the defeat of German army and its allies in the Soviet Union. And according to the leader of the Deutsche Partei, or the German party in Slovakia, all male members of German minority in certain age were to be mobilized and deployed in the SS. During the year 1944, the war entered Medzev. Mantags from Medzev, especially men, had either to enroll to the SS, or there were other two possibilities of survival: to go hiding or join the partisan groups, mainly of communist ideological background, mainly the so-called Ernst Thälmann partisan group. As one narrator would say, I quote, "You didn't know who the friend was and who the enemy. We had to hide from both the Germans and the Russians." In the autumn 1944, Germans from Slovakia were to be evacuated from the approaching Red Army, and many families had to leave their homes in Medzev. They moved mainly to northern Moravia, at the time part of Nazi Germany. Those who remained in Medzev faced passages of soldiers, be it soldiers of Wehrmacht, be it Hungarians, be it soldiers of Red Army in January 1945. In February 1945, around 200 of Medzev inhabitants were dragged off to coal mines in the Soviet Union. The selection of people to work in the Soviet Union was regarded as unfair. I quote, "Those who were supposed to be transported stayed home, and they took such innocent people." I mentioned the World War II experience of Mantags because they serve as a basis for the post-war categorization of the people. And the question of involvement either in SS or in the partisan groups were very crucial for the subsequent fates of the people. Let's move to the reality of post-war Medzev. According to the decrees of Czechoslovakian President Edvard Beneš, people of German nationality who did not belong to active anti-fascists were to be deprived of Czechoslovakian citizenship, and their property was confiscated. Mantags in Medzev, despite their specific Mantag identity, registered as Germans in pre-war censuses and were therefore deprived of their citizenship and property. Adult Mantags were interned in camps which had been emerging since April 1945. 2 of them, one for men and one for women, were also in Medzev. The camps were originally set up for people coming from the already mentioned evacuation in 1944 from the evacuation from the Red Army. As was, for example, the case of the narrator mentioned with the beginning about that the father of the narrator started shaving and then they came and took them to the lager. The Mantaks who were staying in the lager did not just face the harsh conditions of the camp, but also were forced to clear the region from mines, during which some of them died. Mantaks were also affected by the explosion of the German population during 1946. But until now, the precise number of expelled Mantaks is unknown, but it were dozens of people. In the spring 1946, the commissioners of the Settlement Office for Slovakia, together with members of the district or city national committees, compiled lists of all persons of German nationality. On the basis of property data, the language spoken in the family, the nationality, the people cited in the census in the certain years, the person with the family were proposed to be removed. However, as I mentioned above, the sanctions against Mantaks were often not based on their identity, on the language, which was also commented during the Slovak National Council session. Now I will quote Michal Geci, who was a member of the Slovak National Council, who during the session in 1947 said, I quote, Medzev Moldava district. The commission acting on expulsion did not act objectively, but party-wise, regardless of national or state interest. Now, let's look what one of the narrators would say about the post-war situation. Those Spanish, I quote, those Spanish decrees it later calmed. Medzev was praised because we had how much? We had 30 dead partisans. We had victims that fought against fascism. They were partisan and spoke Mantakish. In the first years after the war, during 1945 until 1947, Mantaks did not take part in the town administration, and we can speak of a typical cleavage between the dominant national community, in this case Slovak, versus the German minority. However, the small and almost intimate Mantak community was not, I would say, united against the enemy. There were many internal cleavages which were based on personal likings, political adherence, and activities during the war. Mantaks, in some cases, informed authorities about other Mantaks or obtained the confiscated property. The commissions who decided about the expulsion or confiscation of property were sometimes making the list of the so-called unreliable according to acquaintances or common political conviction, and often those who really were the perpetrators of crimes remained unaffected. During the consequent years, the cleavage between partisans and so-called fascists, which were in many cases those who had to go and to be enrolled to the SS combat units, became more and more important, and especially after 1948, when the communists took power in Czechoslovakia. In the small society of Medzev, it was widely known who adhered to which category. The narrator MP puts it as follows, I quote, "They knew who was partisan, it was important. Those who were partisans were after the war important." It will also the so-called partisans who gained the most prominent places in the town administration. As the narrator FS would put it, everything went wrong, in my opinion, because among those who came back down as partisans, among them they were honest as well as dishonest. And as they came, they were given here, not just here, but everywhere, the best places in the local administration, and then it went wrong. Mantak or anybody, he was Slovak or Mantak. in spite of the post-war and especially communist glorification of partisans, in the minds of many Mandaks were partisans regarded negatively. And the boundary between the two categories of perpetrators and heroes, thus in the perception of local inhabitants, became very blurred. As AB said, as narrator AB said, I quote, "The partisans were not the best, because they did not have to go fight. They went there on their own. Then anything was done. One man was with the partisans, more Medved inhabitants were with the partisans, and then they talked about how they attacked the Germans, then carved their heads. What all the people told, partisans were not good." I would now come to the conclusion. The Medved inhabitants in majority, Mandaks, experienced during the World War II, stayed behind the new post-war categorization of the local society. Even though in the first post-war years, Mandaks were generally perceived as Germans guilty of the war, and therefore treated as traitors and selectively deprived of their rights, property and homes. After 1948 and the communist coup d'etat in Czechoslovakia, the cleavage between the so-called partisans and so-called fascists became more and more important. The category of fascists, constructed on the basis of the World War II experience, but often unjustified, served as the reason for exclusion from the society, be it expulsion or exclusion from public life. On the other hand, the category of partisan often meant not just public glorification, but also prominent places in the local administration for the individual, but also for his family and relatives and acquaintances. And this internal division of Mandak community based on the experience of during the World War II affected the members for the next half century. And if I now would come back to what was said in the first panel, the forgetting wasn't really working in the close and very intimate Mandak Medved society. The life slowly normalized, but everybody until now knows who is the fascist and who is or was the partisan. We can explore that adherence to the Communist Party, partisan experience or personal relationship were much more decisive for the inclusion into or exclusion from the new post-war society, not the cleavage between the dominant national community, Slovak, versus the German minority. And as I have shown in this short presentation, in a linguistically mixed region such as the town of Medved and surroundings is, the national categories such as German or Slovak were in many cases not the basis for the post-war persecution. And the decision-making of who will be expelled and who will remain was very often situational and based on other criteria than the presupposed fixed national identity. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Teresa. And now we have our second speaker, Astos Kostopoulos. He studied law at the University of Athens and has recently obtained a PhD in history from the University of the Aegean. A thesis dealing with the interaction between social conflict and the emergence of nationalist movements in late Ottoman Macedonia. He has published, the author of 6 books of history, all of them in Greek, and he has also published a number of articles in English, French, and Greek. So I can mention 2 of them, which are most relevant to the topic of the current conference. The first one about the Macedonian question during the 1940s, and the second one, how the North was won and French, la population ethnique et essage de population et politique de colonisation dans le Macedon. So, 20 minutes, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for the acceptance of my proposal. I'm very happy to be here. The Axis occupation Greece between April 1941 and the fall of 1948 brought a humanitarian catastrophe. Violent deaths exceeded 100,000 in a country of just 7 million inhabitants, with deaths from hunger perhaps twice that number. It was followed by an abortive leftist uprising in Athens and a protracted 3-year civil war between communist guerrillas and the conservative government backed by the West between 46 and 49. A development that led to a radical rearrangement of what had been officially considered as a measure of loyalty to the state during World War II. The heads and some members of the Quisling governments were given prison sentences, most of them to be soon released under various amnesties. Economic collaborators were more or less escaped punishment too, and other familiar development all over Europe, Western at least. Armed collaborators of the Wehrmacht, at least those perceived as ethnic Greeks, were also mostly reintegrated into the nation's forces and political life as enemies and victims of communism, on an implicit understanding that their wartime past had to be artfully set aside. Even the officers and soldiers of the security battalions, the main counterinsurgency formation organized by the Quisling government under the orders of SS generals Georgios Strobe and Walter Shimana, were not only summarily acquitted, but also mobilized as the backbone of the national army that fought and won the civil war against the communists. Collaboration of national or ethnic minorities with occupation authorities was treated by the post-war order in a very different way, however. Dictated by the mixture of vindicative feelings for actual misdeeds and traditionally longing for a nationally homogeneous space, retribution took here the form of collective expulsion, either violent or just coerced. Muslim Albanians, or Chams, around 20,000 strong at the beginning of the war, socially marginalized during the previous years and extensively coopted by ISIS as auxiliaries against the resistance, were exposed to a deliberate ethnic cleansing campaign by the nationalist conservative movement of FS. Some are expelled from Albania after a number of demonstrative massacres, with some 1,000 victims, during the summer of 1944. Much smaller, the Italian urban communities of Corfu and Patras, 1,000 to 2,000 each, were deported to Italy in November 44 the first and December 45 the second, with ships provided by the British and the Greek Navy, respectively. Accused of having collaborated with other occupation powers or the communist-led resistance, more than half of the country's Armenian community, around 19,000 out of 33, were also persuaded by the Foreign Directorate, the security service at the time, to leave Greece for Soviet Armenia in the late 40s. The case of the Macedonian Slavs, an ethnic minority considerably larger, and whose social structure and political past allowed for intimate links with established powers at both the national and the local level, proved to be a much more complicated affair. Officially set by the 1928 census at 80,000 persons, but unofficially estimated by secret police and army reports at around 200,000, it comprised both peasants and urbanites established along the country's northern frontier, 2/3 of them to the west of Vardar, Palaxios River, where it constituted a substantial part, between 30% and 65% of the local population, according to the area. During the last decades of Ottoman rule, this Christian Slav population has been divided into a number of rival national parties, defined as such parties, adhering to the respective ideologies and schemes of the neighboring Balkan states. There was a Greek, a Bulgarian, and a Serbian party, as well as a latecomer Macedonian one, which arose as a reaction to the others and forwarded the project of a separate nation state based on a notion of a Macedonian civic and gradually also an ethnic nation. Between 1904 and 1908, those parties had resorted even to arms in order to settle down their scores in a bloody civil war that left scars on the local social fabric, sealing with blood the identities of their hardcore, but also accelerated the process of the ethnic group's internal polarization on a national basis. After the incorporation of Southern Macedonia in the Greek Kingdom in 1913, the ethnic cleansing of the regions attached to Bulgaria and the subsequent removal of the Bulgarian party's social core on an allegedly voluntary basis during the population crisis, Greek official discourse vacillated between the recognition of a Slav national minority and outright negation of its existence. A policy of national and linguistic assimilation was finally put into practice, supported by pre-existing extensive networks of surveillance. Facilitated by the rules of parliamentary democracy, which allowed for a certain protection of the minorities members by their representatives in parliament, and by the adherence of the minority of its more militant offsprings to a communist movement that promised to them the enjoyment of minority rights, contrary to all the other political spectrum. The minorities' integration into the social fabric of the Greek nation-state was, however, repeatedly called into question by the nationalist scaremongering of the local deep state, whose representatives, many of them Greek-minded Slavs, inflated the looming danger of the minorities' presence in order to magnify their own importance as protectors of state security. It came to a number 10 in 1936 when the dictatorship of General Metaxas imposed a severe ban to any public use of the Macedonian language, provoking a widespread disenchantment that alienated even the most sincere Greek nationalists among the local Macedonian Slavs. During the occupation, the Axis occupation, the minorities' attitude was far from beautiful. While the first weeks after the collapse of the Greek state saw widespread rejoicing at the end of police and linguistic repression, the following months and years witnessed the emergence of multifarious reactions to the new regime. Among Greece and Macedonian Slavs, there were many open or veiled collaborators of the Axis authorities, both on nationalist, Macedonian and Bulgarian, or an opportunist base. There was also a large number of resistance members, from early fighters to labor tower recruits, as well as a whole array of intermediate grey zone actors or just by status. Between 14,000 and 18,000 people were inscribed in the local branches of a Bulgarian club based in Salonika, whose ID cards offered access to relief food distribution from Sofia and a degree of protection from German or Italian reprisals. Its members were, however, not restricted to its membership to Macedonian Slavs alone, but included also ethnic Greeks looking after such benefits. Far more serious was the enrollment of at least 3,000 Slavs from the villages around Kastolia and Edessa in the counter-insurgency formations of an Axis Bulgarian-Macedonian committee, run by the Italians in 1943, and 3 volunteer security battalions, the Dobrovolchesky Druzhina and Ochrana, organized in 1944 by the Zagreb-based Interno-Macedonian Revolution Organization, as auxiliary units of Bernard. Just like their ethnic Greek counterparts of the security battalions, the members of these formations participated in a number of raids against resistance strongholds or hideouts, in reprisal actions and in day-to-day political policing. Some of them took, of course, the opportunity to settle old scores with their Greek or pro-Greek neighbors. The pro-communist Elas guerrilla, the only serious resistance force on that ground, attempted to stop this drive with selective attacks on some militia strongholds and a wave of individual killings elsewhere, with various results. While far more effective proved to be the implementation of the old communist traditional promise of minority rights, from schools up to the official recognition and positive discrimination of minority members to the local resistance administration, parallel administration. And, minority support for resistance also brought Axis reprisals, with many villages burned down by counter-insurgency drives of Italian army and Wehrmacht and their auxiliaries, and there was at least one wholesale massacre of unarmed peasants in a Slav village by Greek Nazis, clearly formerly Catalans. As a result of deliberate communist effort to impose self-restraint, the transitional phase of liberation saw thus a remarkably low level of retaliatory violence against even the most exposed Slav communities. Although there were some sporadic outbursts of bloody reprisals, they were mostly on an individual matter, targeting only a few persons with bloody records, tens of Okhrana militia men were also among the 500 collaborators of various ethnic descent who were imprisoned by the resistance and handed over to the national unity government. On the other hand, the restoration of anti-communist regime in the spring of 1945, after the defeat of Hellas by the British in Athens, was followed by a wave of nationalist terror, explicitly aiming at enforcing the minorities' removal from Greek territory. In Eastern Macedonia, an area that had been previously annexed by Bulgaria and subjected to a very harsh campaign of forced assimilation and the cleansing of its Greek population, the persecution of Slav minority took the form of wholesale expulsion of entire villages or even towns by nationalist Greek bands. A considerable part of this endeavor was undertaken by a local right-wing chieftain of Slav descent, Captain Tashka, whose unpublished memoirs describe in full detail how he purged the border region from hostile elements, attributing himself the status of semi-official arbiter of the loyalty of his own peoples. In Western Macedonia, the persecution of Slavs was also widespread and indiscriminate, with systematic plunder, sexual violence, and occasional murders, targeted not only those who had been exposed as Axis collaborators or as members of the pro-communist resistance, but also non-political bystanders on the basis of their mother tongue. In many villages, the use of this tongue was again prohibited by order of the National Guard commanders who were appointed there by the state in order to bring the population to heel. These persecutions were not just a product of spontaneous grassroots reaction, instigated by old memories and fears exacerbated by recent traumatic experience. Although at the micro level of local politics, vindication provided also the reason for such random violence, ethnic violence, the political prerequisites of its unleashing can be set more centrally, on the basis of a rational planning for ethnic cleansing. Elements of that plan can be detected at 4 different levels. In the private correspondence and official reports kept in private archives of high-ranking government and army figures, such as the Prime Minister in exile, and others. One of them, the Chief of Army Intelligence at the time, Amenonis Vertos, had already previewed in October 1944 that before any peace settlement, we must exterminate or at least expel to Bulgaria all the Bulgarians who were left after the population exchanges. His model was Byzantium, that was left in peace only after Emperor Basil, the Bulgar slayer, had 10,000 Bulgarians landed, as the Byzantine chronographers described. And there were also liberal journalists describing this process that had taken place. Second, in similar reports forwarded by the heads of local administration, prefects and appointed mayors, kept in the respective archives. Third, in the main articles of the Greek press, both local and national, both right-wing and liberal, where the Macedonian Slavs were objectively qualified as the Sudeten of Greece and with a demand for their wholesale deportation according to the model already set by the Czechs. Last but not least, similar demands were put forward also in Parliament by local national figures and Athenian elite statesmen alike. There are some among them, a former diplomat and the future permanent vice minister of external affairs, who would be responsible for Greece's Macedonian policies, Ioannis Politis, and who said that we must clean our Greek atmosphere from this miasma of people with 2 languages and your personal status and ambiguous sentiments. While national discourse provided random ethnic violence with a certain political legitimacy, a parallel bureaucratic process was put secretly into operation within the upper echelons of the post-war state security apparatus, compiling lists for an official definite ethnic cleansing. In September 1945, 2 former deputies, national deputies from this border region, were authorized by the foreign ministry to make a local survey and to classify all Slav villages according to their actual national proclivities, pro-Bulgarian, of Greek consciousness or of a fluid consciousness, in October, an official census of all non-Greek speaking citizens considered of Bulgarian or Romanian beliefs, of Latin-speaking lands, was ordered by decree signed by 3 ministers, Interior, Military and Justice, anticipating also a secondary distinction into aggravating or alleviating cases. We speak about national consciousness as detected by the authorities. The final list was compiled by the local committees composed by the respective heads of administration, the army, the security service, and the judiciary, was submitted in July 46 and enumerated 104,000 Macedonians of Bulgarian beliefs, most of them on aggravating criteria. On the basis of these statistics, the Minister of Public Order, Spiros Theotokis, proposed the expulsion of all of them as part of the incoming Paris peace settlement. There was also a third committee set by the Army, General Army Staff, who proposed similar measures. The comparison between the above-mentioned lists provide us with an opportunity to elucidate not only the deficiencies of this classification process, but also the political imperatives that dictated its results. Former strongholds of the Axis militias were classified there as 100% Greek feeling, while those who sided with the resistance are, on the contrary, considered as pro-Bulgarian. If we examine some of these cases more closely, then we discern that not only the common denominator of anti-communism, but also the pre-existing links before the war between the Athenian elite and its local political clientele, and more concretely with the local party bosses who influences a village's political attitude, both in war and peace, and in peace and wartime, could be crucial for the final outcome of such a delicate soul weight. Because we speak about consciousness and not about acts. At the end, no political, no official ethnic cleansing was ever materialized de jure. Instead of it, the white terror of nationalist violence and subsequent civil war hostilities imposed a de facto heavy toll on the Macedonian Slav communities. Around 27,000 refugees left Greek Macedonia for Bulgaria and Yugoslavia between the liberation and the formation of the communist-led Democratic Army at the end of 46. During the next 3 years of civil war, another 20,000 Macedonian Slavs left Greece as a result of a counter-insurgency campaign that deliberately burned down their villages in order to force them into exile. There are proofs of that. There are at least, if not orders, at least suggestions at a very highest level. After the war's end, and in the fall of 49, these achievements were legally validated by the bureaucratic procedure of the deep state apparatus carried out in full secrecy. The gradual collective deprivation of thousands of Macedonian Slav refugees or immigrants to the New World of their Greek citizenship on the basis of a, of a 1927 presidential decree that allowed such a measure in the case of non-ethnic Greeks, allogenes, who left Greece with no intention to return, an individual purpose ostensibly ascertained by the state's secret services, with no previous hearing of the interested person, no right of appeal, but nor even a formal notification of the respective administrative act to its victim. They learned that they had lost the Greek citizenship when some of them wanted to come back. Those were emigrants. The political refugees did not anyway. As the official historian and foreign minister expert for 3.5 decades, from 63 to 95, Evangelos Kofos later to claim, Greece was delivered to an alien conscious minority which had actively threatened their security and internal peace, a development described by him as the beneficial side effect of what had otherwise be a full-scale national tragedy. Not all Macedonian Slavs left Greece Macedonia, however. On the contrary, civil war led to a redefinition of national correctness. The early dichotomy between collaboration and resistance, which was universally accepted in the public space after the occupation, being gradually replaced by the cleavage between communists and anti-communists. Far from being a secret affair, this rearrangement was highly proclaimed as an informal offer of amnesty for any Second World War misdeeds in exchange for a newfound political loyalty. As early as May 1947, the future Minister of Public Order, Konstantinos Revis, proclaimed in Parliament that it was already too late for a comprehensive ethnic cleansing, while those who followed social systems incompatible with the Greek nation, that is communism, should be ostracized forever, no matter what their mother tongue is, both Greek-speaking and Slav-speaking, he explained. All the rest shall be considered as Greeks on the basis of the new criteria that have been created. End of quote. Even more eloquent was Philippos Dragounis, one of the compilers of the already forgotten list of 1945. The last opportunity for those misguided Bulgarian-speaking villagers to prove their remorse and their will to stay Greeks, he declared in print in early 1948, had been the elections of 1946, which were boycotted by the Communist Party. If they voted, their repentance is certified. End of quote. The results of the rearrangement are clearly discerning even today when we check the family history, the family background of our more intransigent Macedonian fighters participating nationalist in the promotion of nationalists over the Macedonian issue. But this is a completely different story to be narrated by the historians of the future.
So thank you to our speakers, and we have now more than, we have now about 40 minutes for, sorry.
40 minutes.
40 minutes.
Yeah, 40 minutes.
40 minutes, okay, sorry. I'm a little confused, but it's my fault. Okay, anyway, we have time for discussion. So the first question is about...
I have a question concerning those partisan movements in Slovakia. I mean, it is certainly true that in autumn 1944, the Germans were facing a very strong partisan movement, fighting the Germans together with parts of a regular army. But as far as I know, after the breakdown of the national uprising, the partisan movement nearly disappeared. Yeah, the losses had been extremely high, and only some small groups were trying to survive somewhere in the woods or in the mountains. How does that go together with that partisan myth, which obviously appeared after 1945?
So maybe we can collect the question, the first round, if you agree. So is there any second question? Okay.
So I wonder if you could tell us more about Montauk's. First of all, how many were expelled? It was unclear to me from your presentation how many stayed and how many were expelled in that number. Are Montauk's only in this town, or are they in the whole region? What else do I know about Montauk's? So yeah, there's another question, which is, you know, there's this sort of new school, if you will, of national indifference. We're talking about nationality of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And I wonder if the question is with Montauk's, you know, specifically, whether you would consider that their sense of nationality is weak, that it's indifferent, that they, you know, that they can switch back and forth from being Slovak to Montauk. Same thing one could ask about Macedonians as well. Could they be Greek? Could they be Macedonians? Or, you know, do they have a very strong sense of who they are, and would therefore want to defend it under various sorts of circumstances? You said they want to have the choice of, you know, joining the SS or going into hiding or going into partisans. Would they just as soon have gone into any of them, something, just to survive? It didn't matter. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that. And maybe Macedonians. I mean, I don't know that much about Greek Macedonians in this period. but you know, they could go back and forth, right? I mean, they also identified as Greeks, as well as Macedonians, I thought. I mean, so this question of national difference, is it one of weak nationality, or is it one of where we know more?
Okay, so we can start now.
I can make a question. Also, it's similar to what Mr. Nana said. How the Mantax is a self-identification or a hetero-identification? And how it was received, if it is a self, received by the Czechoslovak society in general? And that's it. And what it means, it's a way to describe German speakers that are not exactly of German identity, or it's some local variety?
So partisans,
Thank you for the questions. As you already said, this partisan issue, that's the myth. Whenever you have those big myths, there are parts of the story that just disappear. And that is the case of the small Medzev society, that the big story is remembered, and that someone went to the forest to fight the German army, the regular German army. The main narrative in the society, therefore, is this person was in some partisan group in any time during the end of the war, and therefore he deserves the glorification. Not just he, but the whole family. I don't know whether I answered your question, but this was also the part of the myth or glorification. Was also the question of executions of the partisans, and even now I would connect several questions. There are very few data about the people from this close society. So, for example, I don't know, and nobody knows. It's what is the precise number of the people expelled from the city? I said during the presentation that it were dozens of people. But the majority remained. And why do I say this? But it is precisely known how many partisans were executed. It was 3, and where, and to which brigade they adhered. Now, to your question about Mantax. The question about the numbers, it's often difficult because because of the problem of the category of Mantag and its definition. Sometimes people define it as all Germans from the big region Spiš in Slovakia, which is a region coming from north, Kežmarok, to the south. To South Slovakia, but in the closest definition, the Mantags are people living only in this city. Therefore, before the war, we can speak about 2,000 people, and after the war, again the problem with numbers. The people in the post-war censuses. Did not feel that they would be they are Germans because during the process of Reslovakization of those people, the people feared of speaking that we speak German or this local dialect at home. And therefore, when speaking about nationality or ethnicity, I'm not really personally happy with these terms when dealing with this society, and I prefer the term or the category that Gabriela Kilianova, a Slovakian scientist, said or coined, which is language group, German language group, not national group or Mantak ethnic group. My previous research focused on the identity of the people, and the identity of the people who identify themselves as Mantak is very fluid. Sometimes the people would say, "I am a Mantak, and that's it. That's my identity. This is it's based on my heritage. It's based on what my ancestors did, and is based on the fact that I'm living here." Sometimes the people would say, and I really like this thing that one narrator said, that he is a Slovak, but he has the Mantak in the corner of his heart. This is the question of the Mantak identity, and it's the same with the German identification. Sometimes the people say Mantak, that means German. Some people say that's something totally different. We are Mantaks, not Germans from Germany. And about the self and hetero identification, the category of Mantak is mainly self-identification. And because the number of the Mantak is so low, they are not even anyhow received by the society. They are received by the society which is living in the corner. And I don't think that anybody in Košice, which is the second biggest city of Slovakia, 40 kilometers far away from Medvedev, I don't think that the majority of inhabitants of Košice would even know who Mantaks is. And what is quite interesting about this name Mantak, in Slovak and Czech context, it's also used negatively to name someone who is not really the cleverest one. So some people say you are Mantak, not knowing that this would mean a category of a German-speaking people, but they use it as like pejoratively.
Okay.
I used the word Macedonian Slavs to describe the whole ethno-linguistic group, because that's what they refer to. Of course, it's self-identification. We cannot, if Dubici who can speak, at that time we had a Macedonian national movement, but it's a very, very small part of the whole group. The position of this whole group can be best described as a system of concentric circles. You can have a hardcore that are nationalists, and concentric and various circles, outer circles, of a less strong loyalty. This can be also seen in the social social base of the various parties in each place. The various parties, the national parties, Bulgarska stranka, Srpska strana, Bulgarska partija, Ελληνικό κόμμα, that are described as such in the sources of the early 20th century. Now, there was some kind of an identity. Many of them describe themselves as Bulgarians, others describe themselves as Slav-speaking Greeks, or even as the best descendants of, for example, the Greek, because the Greek side to take, to gain them politically. Its party created a set of national ideology that described, among other things, the local Slav dialect as a descendant of the ancient Macedonian language. It was a Greek creation that backfired 101 century later. But at that time, we have the gradual emergence during the interwar years, the first half of the 20th century, of a self-identification as Macedonians, but it's not an identity of positive nationalism at first. It's an identity of exclusion of the others. I'm not a Bulgarian, I'm not a Greek, I'm a local guy, I'm Macedonian. There is a very classic text of Greek literature, and now it's called Life in the Tomb. It's the main interwar, anti-war novel. It's the Greek equivalent of nothing more, no use from the Western Front of Remark. And there describes a village where those people say we are no Bulgar, no Serb, no Greeks, no Greeks, we're Macedonian Orthodox. Because we don't want to take sides. That was the beginning. And this one version of it evolved into Macedonian nationalism. But it's interesting that during a census organized in the first year of the months of occupation by the Bulgarian apparatus with the German coverage, when people were asked to self-describe themselves, there were many of them who said, I'm Macedonian, nationality Macedonian. For the same villages, Greek sources say, oh, there are good Greeks who under Bulgarian pressure declare themselves as Macedonians. Bulgarian sources say they are secret Bulgarians who do not dare to declare themselves as such, so they choose the Macedonian self-identification. This fluid situation you described, and we can see also in the Madax, as much as understood, that was the basis of this identification nexus.
Thank you. Second round.
Yes. So Teresa and the Mantax again. I have to push on a little after you answered Norman's question by saying, well, we really don't know how many were expelled, and I even say how many left. Because your basic thesis is kind of that the post-war treatment, expulsion and so on, was not so much treated based on culture, language, ethnicity, but attitude, political behavior, and so on. But so, for that purpose, we would have to see the results. So what we have is, in the interwar era, the village was still 90% German, in whatever form speaking. There must be some traces of this now, if you feel like they weren't just universally expelled or fled. So what's the status of the local German-speaking community in Medzev today? Do they have any legal status? Are there any schools? Is there a name tradition, last names that still puts the village apart? Or really, are there hardly any of that old community left? And perhaps there wasn't such a big difference which attitudes they had, they're still all gone.
Any second question? If there is any question? Okay, so we can start.
I'm very much aware of the critique of numbers, and I am going to devote more attention to this topic. But as I've said, these are only the first kick-off ideas of the project. The Medzev society remained German, and the majority of the Montaks remained in the city, and the city remained its let's say German-speaking or Montauk character until the 1960s. In the 1960s, there was a huge fabric built on, and therefore a lot of Slovaks from neighboring villages came to the city, and the character of the city slightly was getting a bit different. But until now, as you said about the local situation, the German minority in Slovakia has its own legal status, and it's official in one of the so-called national, or Slovaks call it national or ethnic minority. So the German is one of the national or ethnic minorities in Slovakia, and those Montaks in Medzev are regarded as a subgroup of this German minority. Therefore, they even have bilingual school, and there was a very rich communication with Germany during the first years after 1989. However, nowadays the interest, be it interest from Germany or from Bratislava, is not for the Mantak community is not that huge as it used to be, but it's still a kind of vital community, especially for the older people. But even the younger people are dancing in dancing groups, singing in the local Mantak chorus, and so on.
Questions? So I have maybe not questions, or maybe some commentary to get back to the context of the idea of our conference. So you have mentioned in your paper that forgetting didn't work in a small community. I mean, so often after the end of the war and the subsequent years, that it was not so easy to forget, and everyone knew about what the other people did in the war and so on. So could we make some maybe comparison with the first panel? I mean, especially with the case of this of shade women, because you have mentioned that these women were reintegrated in the society after this kind of punishment. But as far as I know, it was not very easy, and it was not very easy for these women to live in their community after this punishment. So it was very complicated and difficult to live there after the punishment, after their heads were shaved. So my questions, and then I'm going back to the first question of what is about this reintegration of the nation, this reintegration of the former collaborators or former enemies after this punishment, or this wave of the punishment in the immediate post-war period. Did it work? The reintegration of these people in the society? But because you have mentioned, maybe it didn't work in this case of the local community in Mantak. So the similar question is, maybe it did work in the case of French women in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So how they perceive themselves, how the neighbors perceive these women who were punished in 45, 46, and so on. And it's only my suggestion for discussions. So the question, but okay, you have some to say.
I would react. In the context of method, there are several layers that you have to think of. The first one, as I've already mentioned, is the cleavage between the Slovak and the German minority. So first, the whole, let's say, the Mantak group had to reintegrate it to the majority society through regaining the citizenship. First, which for the whole Mantak society happened in the beginning of 1950s. And then you have the second layer, this distinction or the cleavage between those partisans and fascists, which is among the older generation vital until today. That's why I started to deal with this topic and to go back to see what is behind the thing that you go to a cafeteria today and they tell you, oh, this is the fascist, or look, this was a partisan, and that's because and that's why his daughter is sitting in the municipality. So these are several layers. What do you think of as the, let's say, official or state level reintegration, and what is the reintegration in this small society?
If you allow a comment on this, I think that when we speak about women's treatment in the after-war years, we must distinguish also distinguish between nationalist exclusion and side effects of social backwardness. For example, in Greece, we had my local hometown, Hania and Creta, no ethnic question. From my investigation, I found that there was a problem of integration, possible integration, not only of those women who had sided with Germans, etc., but also of the very much praised heroines of the local ISLD, that is intelligence service network, functioning inside the local town, which is a very big German garrison, connected to the British ones, so there is no question of communists, etc., of political discrimination, but had acted as spies in working for the pro-British networks. There were women of rather middle or even high class origin, but because they were they had to be in touch with the high German hierarchy during the occupation, who had more learning greater than much of the rest of the Greece, because of the strategic role of the island. So they had a problem of find husbands, etc., after the war. So one part of their remuneration by the British services was that they sent them to good posts in the UN, United Nations, or other places out of Crete and maybe also out of Greece, in order to be socially rehabilitated in another. And they were not collaborators, but women who had been considered heroines at the time. We had the opposite thing, with the opposite case with the German, ethnic German women who came to Greece just after the war as wives or mistresses of Greek workers that had been sent or worked by themselves into Germany during the war. And they made some local Germans, and the Germans came back. This is a taboo question, I tracked down, I ran into a personal memoir, of non-political nature, from one of that time, who described what happened with them. The state intervened and sent no German wives, the post-war state. No German wives, no German mistresses. They put them into concentration camps near Athens, and nobody knows what happened to them afterwards. Maybe they were deported, maybe they ran out and they were integrated, but in a very discriminatory way. But it's something not discussed at all. It's only one description found of a whole concentration camp in Athens.
Thank you. So, any commentary or question to this topic or to another topic? I mean, the topic of the difficulties of social integration in the local environment and this national integration maybe on the central level, or any other question to both speakers? Okay, there's no question then. First of all, thank you for both speakers, thank you for the discussion. One important thing, we have a lunch break in 15 minutes, I think, so that means we will go together. It's in this building, but it's a little bit, it's not so easy to find it, so we'll go together, and I suggest we can the meeting point is in the front of this room, and we can start, let's say, in 10 minutes. Yeah? In 10 minutes in the front of this room. Thank you.